My name is Laura, and for the last 20 years, I have lived a lie. A very beautiful lie, I must admit. A lie with an ocean view, with private drivers, with trips to places most people only see in movies. A lie paid for with silence. Silence was the price of my freedom. But freedom bought with someone else's blood is never truly free. And now my time is running out. The doctors gave me 6 months. A cancer, one of the aggressive kinds, that spread like a weed inside of me. And the irony is that, for the first time in my life, the fortune I have can't buy the one thing I want. More time. But maybe it can buy something else. A chance to cleanse my soul, to tell the truth about my ex-husband, the tech genius the world admires, the truth about his partner, our best friend, who died far too young, and the truth about me, the woman who knew everything and chose luxury over justice. This is my confession. It wasn't always like this. Before the money, before the lies, before the blood, there was just the three of us. Me, Alexander, and David. We met in college. I was an architecture student, full of dreams. Alexander was a business student, with an ambition that burned brighter than the sun. And David was the genius. A computer science student, shy, brilliant, with a heart that was too big for his own good. Alexander was the face, the voice, the seller of dreams. David was the brain, the silent architect who turned Alexander's crazy ideas into reality. And I was the glue that held them together. The three of us were inseparable. We lived in small apartments, ate pizza on the living room floor, and spent sleepless nights dreaming about the future. The future was a small software company they founded in David's father's garage. The idea was revolutionary, something to do with data compression, something that, at the time, sounded like magic. I drew their first logo on a paper napkin. Alexander sold the idea to anyone who would listen, and David coded day and night, fueled by coffee and a pure passion for creation. And in the beginning, it was beautiful. It was ours. I married Alexander, a simple wedding, at a courthouse, with David as our best man and witness. Our reception was a barbecue in the backyard with our college friends. We were happy. We were a team. Poor, but happy. Then success came. And it didn't come like a gentle wave. It came like a tsunami. An angel investor saw the potential in their software and injected an amount of money that, to us, seemed infinite. We moved out of the garage and into a real office. We hired our first employees, and the company started to grow, exponentially. That's when I started to lose the man I had married. Alexander's ambition, which was once a flame that warmed me, became a furnace that began to burn everything around it. He became obsessed. The sleepless nights dreaming together were replaced by nights he spent awake, alone, in the office, staring at charts and projections. Our conversations about the future were replaced by his monologues about market share, about crushing the competition. The money started rolling in. A lot of money. We moved to a luxury apartment, then to a house in a gated community. I stopped working at my small architecture firm. "You don't need that anymore, my love," he told me. "Your job now is to be my first lady." My job became hosting dinners for investors, choosing the right wine for parties, smiling and looking pretty in the photos for the society columns. I became an accessory, a first lady of a kingdom I hadn't helped build, only decorate. And our friendship with David, it started to change too. Alexander, who once saw him as a brother, began to see him as an asset, or sometimes as an obstacle. David was the heart of the company. He cared about the employees. He called everyone by name. He believed in the company's original mission, to create technology to improve people's lives. Alexander, on the other hand, only saw the numbers. He started talking about optimizing resources, which was his corporate way of saying firing people. He wanted to prepare the company to be sold to a tech giant, or to go public on the stock exchange, an IPO, the big move that would transform him from a simple millionaire into a billionaire. David was against it, completely against it. "We didn't create our company for this, Alex," I remember him saying, in a heated argument in our first real office. "We created it to innovate, to have a cool place to work. If we sell, they'll destroy everything we've built. They'll fire our team. They'll turn our technology into another soulless product." Alexander just laughed. "You're a genius, David. But you're a terrible businessman. Let me handle this part." The arguments became more frequent. The partnership that was born in the garage was cracking under the weight of success, and I was in the middle. I saw David's side. His heart was in the right place, but I was also seduced by the luxury, by the life Alexander was building for us, and out of cowardice, I remained silent. The breaking point happened one weekend. Alexander had just bought his first big toy, a yacht, a huge, high-tech boat that cost a fortune. He invited David to spend the weekend on the boat with him. Just the two of us, like the old days, he told me, so we can get our thoughts in order, resolve our differences. I had a bad feeling, an anguish in my chest that I couldn't explain. "Be careful," I told David, when he stopped by our house to pick up Alexander. He smiled, that same kind, naive smile. "Don't worry, Laura. We're brothers. We always work things out." Those were the last words I ever heard from him. They left on Saturday morning. On Sunday night, my phone rang. It was the Coast Guard. There had been an accident. The boat had capsized. Alexander had been rescued by a fisherman in a state of shock, but physically fine. David had disappeared at sea. I rushed to the small coastal town where they had taken Alexander. He was in a hospital room, sedated. When he woke up, I was by his side. The story he told was confusing. A sudden storm. A rogue wave. The boat flipped too fast. He tried to hold David's hand, but the current swept him away. He cried. He seemed devastated, but there was something strange, something in his eyes, a calmness behind the panic, a control behind the desperation. I knew my husband, and the man in that hospital bed wasn't a man who had just lost his best friend. He was a man who had just solved his biggest business problem. David's body was found 2 days later. The cause of death was drowning. The case was closed as a tragic accident, a terrible accident. That day, at our best friend's funeral, as I watched my husband carry the casket with tears that looked so real, I knew a terrible truth, a truth that settled in my heart like a shard of ice. That day, I didn't just lose our best friend. I lost the man I had married. The funeral was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Alexander, the widower of his own best friend, gave the most moving eulogy I have ever heard. He spoke of David's genius, of his good heart, of the dreams they built together in the garage. He cried, crocodile tears, thick and convincing, that fooled everyone. They fooled David's parents, who hugged him, thanking him for being such a good friend to their son. They fooled the company's employees, who saw him as a devastated but strong leader. They fooled everyone but me. I stood there, dressed in black, receiving condolences from people, playing my part as the supportive wife. But inside, I was screaming. Every word from Alexander was a stab. Every one of his tears, an insult to the memory of the man he had murdered. I saw David everywhere, in the faces of his parents, in the stories our college friends told, and in the accusing silence behind my husband's eyes. In the days that followed, my home, that cold, modern mansion Alexander had bought, became my investigation ground. While he was at the company, consolidating his now absolute power, I started to search. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I needed something concrete, something to prove that I wasn't going crazy. I found the first piece of the puzzle by chance. I was tidying up the home office, a place Alexander rarely used. In a drawer full of equipment manuals, I found an envelope from a marine maintenance company. Inside was a work order. The date was 2 days before the accident. The service was the removal of the EPIRB, the satellite emergency locator beacon, from the yacht. The reason listed was upgrade to a new model, but there was no invoice for a new model, no installation order. He had removed the most important piece of safety equipment from the boat, days before heading out to sea with the partner he wanted to eliminate. My heart hammered in my chest. A coincidence? Terrible negligence? Or part of a plan? I kept looking. A rich man's life is made of paperwork, and paperwork doesn't lie. In the office safe, where he kept company documents, I found the insurance policy he had insisted David take out a few months earlier. It's to protect the company, Dave. If something happens to one of us, the company needs capital to stay afloat, is what he'd said at the time. It seemed to make sense. But as I read the details of the policy, my blood ran cold. The beneficiary of David's multi-million-dollar life insurance policy was not his mother or his father. It was the company itself. And with David's death, total control of the company, and therefore the insurance money, passed to the sole remaining partner, Alexander. The accident not only removed an obstacle, but it also injected millions into the cash reserves of the company that was now his alone. It was the perfect crime. The motive was right there, in fine print, in insurance jargon that hid an ocean of greed. The final proof, the most technological and cold of all, came from my own knowledge of the past. In the early years of the company, the three of us had full access to the servers. I still remembered the password to an old backup system, a digital relic Alexander had probably forgotten existed. Locked in my room, late at night, I accessed the system, and I started looking at the activity logs from the day of the accident. And then I saw it, the line of code that sealed my conviction forever. The time was 2:32 p.m. on Saturday. The log showed an action: admin access revoked for user David M. And then, master password change for main server. The time the Coast Guard said the boat capsized was around 5 in the afternoon. Alexander was locking David out of his own company, digitally, hours before the accident that would kill him. He wasn't just planning to kill his partner, he was executing a corporate coup at the same time. With those 3 pieces of evidence, the radio maintenance, the insurance policy, and the server log, my suspicion became a granite certainty. I was no longer married to an ambitious businessman. I was sleeping next to a murderer. The fear I felt was paralyzing, but the image of David's gentle smile, of our friend, was stronger. I had to confront him. I waited for him to come home that night. He walked in, whistling, happy with another successful day in business. He seemed lighter, more powerful than ever. I waited for him in our gigantic, silent living room. "Alexander, we need to talk," I said, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. He stopped, his smile fading. "What is it, Laura?" I didn't beat around the bush. I went straight to the point. "Why was the emergency radio on the boat removed 2 days before the trip?" He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. "Routine maintenance. I already explained that. And the insurance policy?" I continued. "Why was the company the beneficiary and not his family? A requirement from the investors. Asset protection. David agreed to everything. It's standard practice," he replied, his voice cold, each word a rehearsed answer. "And why did you change the passwords and revoke his server access hours before the accident was reported?" I fired, my last bullet. He was silent for a long moment. The mask of the caring husband fell away, and the face that remained was of someone I didn't know. Cold, merciless, dangerous. "Have you been snooping through my papers, Laura?" he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Are you crazy? Delirious with grief? Don't call me crazy, Alexander. I know what I saw." He moved closer to me, and for the first time in my life I was afraid of him, physically afraid. "You didn't see anything," he said, his face inches from mine. "You don't know anything. You are my wife, and you're starting to get some very dangerous ideas. Ideas that are dangerous for the future of the company and for our future. You need to be very careful about what you think and what you say." It was a threat, clear, unmistakable. I didn't back down. "What are you going to do?" I challenged. "Drown me too?" The slap didn't hit my face. It hit my soul. He stepped back and laughed. A short, humorless laugh. "Don't be dramatic, Laura. I would never hurt you. You're my wife, but it's clear our marriage is over. The trust is gone." He turned and went to his office. He came back a few minutes later with a leather folder. He threw it on the glass coffee table. "I was already prepared for this," he said. "The lawyers were very efficient." I opened the folder. Inside was a series of documents, a divorce settlement, and a financial agreement. The numbers made me gasp. A sum of money that would make me one of the richest women in the country. Properties. A lifelong alimony that was more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It was all mine, on one condition. Attached to the agreement was another document. A non-disclosure agreement. An NDA, as they call it. The most restrictive one I had ever seen. It forbade me from saying anything about our life together, about the company, about David, about the accident, anything, forever, under penalty of losing everything and facing a lawsuit that would destroy me. I looked at the papers, the divorce settlement, the financial settlement, and the settlement of silence. And I understood. This wasn't the paperwork for a divorce. It was a receipt, proof of purchase. He wasn't ending our marriage. He was buying my soul. And the price was right there in front of me, in numbers and legal clauses. I spent that night awake, sitting on the edge of our $1 million bed, the divorce papers spread across the silk duvet. Alexander's offer wasn't an offer. It was a checkmate. He had thought of everything, and he knew me better than anyone. He knew exactly where to apply pressure. My first reaction, the reaction of the young, idealistic Laura, who still lived in some dusty corner of my soul, was pure fury. I wanted to tear up those papers. I wanted to take my circumstantial evidence and run to the nearest police station. I wanted to scream to the world that the tech genius, the visionary everyone applauded, was a cold-blooded murderer. I wanted justice for David. But then, the second reaction, that of the woman who had lived the last decade at the epicenter of power and money, took over, and she was colder, more pragmatic, and infinitely more cowardly. What did I really have? A maintenance record his lawyers would claim was an administrative error, an insurance policy that David himself had signed, which they would say was a prudent business practice, and a server log, a bunch of code that an army of tech experts hired by him would debunk in 5 minutes, accusing me of forgery, of being a bitter and vengeful ex-wife. I didn't have a murder weapon. I didn't have a witness. I had only my word against that of one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. He wouldn't be arrested. I would be destroyed. They would drag me through the mud, leak false stories to the press, paint me as crazy, unstable, a gold digger. Alexander wouldn't need to kill me. He would simply erase my credibility, my reputation, my existence. And there was another truth, an uglier truth, one I was slow to admit to myself, there in the silence of that early morning. I wasn't just afraid of Alexander. I was afraid of going back to being who I was before. The Laura who counted coins to pay the rent. The Laura who dreamed of a weekend trip to the beach. I had gotten used to luxury. Luxury was an addiction, a silent drug. I had gotten used to the dinners, the clothes, the status of being Mrs. Montero. To give up that world, to be expelled from that Olympus, was another kind of death, and I didn't know if I had the strength to survive it. I couldn't bring David back. Justice wouldn't resurrect him. But the money would buy me a new life, a life away from Alexander, a safe life, a life of luxury, but a life. It was a weak justification, I know. It was the devil's whisper on my shoulder, offering me the world in exchange for my soul. And I, with my eyes full of tears of guilt and fear, decided to accept the offer. Signing the contract was the coldest day of my life. It took place in the conference room of a law firm in the financial district, a room made entirely of glass, overlooking the city, which made me feel like an insect in a box. Alexander wasn't there. He didn't need to be. He sent his soldiers. 3 lawyers in impeccable suits with faces that showed no emotion. They explained the clauses, one by one, the division of assets, the bank transfers, and finally, the non-disclosure agreement. With every paragraph they read, I felt a piece of my history being locked away in a safe. I couldn't write a book. I couldn't give an interview. I couldn't even have a casual conversation about my years with Alexander. I was being paid to erase my own memory. When it was time to sign, my hand trembled. The lawyer offered me a heavy gold pen. I took the pen, felt its weight, and signed my name at the bottom of each page. Laura de Almeida Montero. With each signature, I felt David's ghost drift a little further away from me. I was betraying him again, officially, with a notarized signature. The moment I signed the last paper, my phone buzzed. A notification from the bank. A number with so many zeros it seemed unreal had just entered my account. The payment had been made. I had sold my silence. I left that building and never saw Alexander in person again. I bought an apartment, a penthouse in a European capital, a city where no one knew me, a beautiful place, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a breathtaking view. I decorated it with the most expensive furniture, with works of art, with everything money could buy, and it became my luxury prison. I traveled the world. I went to Japan in the spring to see the cherry blossoms. I went to Tanzania on a safari. I stayed in the most exclusive hotels, ate at the most star-studded restaurants. I did everything a rich, free woman was supposed to do. But I was never truly free, and I was always alone. Loneliness was my constant companion, a shadow that not even the Caribbean sun could dispel. In every fancy restaurant, I sat at a table for one. In every art gallery, I walked the silent halls, with no one to share the beauty or the strangeness of the works. And I was haunted by David. I saw him everywhere. On the street, a man's back with the same way of walking would make my heart stop. In a cafe, a young man with a similar smile would make me look away. And Alexander, I saw him on the covers of magazines at newsstands. The visionary of the year, the man who changed the world of technology. Every article was a stab. Every compliment to him was an insult to the memory of the man he killed to get there. The years passed. 5, 10, 15. The sharp pain of guilt turned into a chronic melancholy, a constant background noise in my opulent and empty life. I got used to my gilded cage. I had peace, a bought artificial peace, but peace nonetheless. I almost managed to convince myself that I had made the right choice, the only possible choice, until, on a rainy autumn morning, 20 years after I had signed that contract, a package arrived for me. It wasn't common for me to receive packages. I had no friends, and my family in Brazil knew I didn't like gifts, but this one was different. A small cardboard box, no return address, just my name and address written on a printed label. My doorman, accustomed to my reclusiveness, left it at my apartment door. I stared at it for a long time, with a terrible premonition. Finally, I picked it up. It was light. I opened it in my marble kitchen. Inside, there was only packing straw and a single small object, wrapped in bubble wrap. With trembling hands, I unwrapped it. It was a fishing lure. Not just any lure. It was an old wooden lure, hand-painted to look like a small fish, its colors already faded. David's lucky lure, the one he used on our first and only fishing trip, years and years ago, when we were just 3 broke kids, fishing in a rented boat on a lake. I remembered him laughing, saying that ugly lure was magic. There was no note, no letter. It wasn't necessary. The message was clear, cold, and it came directly from my ex-husband. After 20 years of absolute silence, he was telling me, in the most subtle and cruel way possible, "I know where you are. I haven't forgotten. And you'd better not have forgotten our deal either." The fragile peace I had built over 2 decades shattered into 1,000 pieces. The past wasn't dead. It was just dormant. And he had just sent me a reminder. I sat holding that fishing lure in my hand for almost an hour, on the floor of my marble kitchen. The coldness of the object seemed to transfer to my bones. 20 years. 20 years of a bought silence, of an artificial peace, and with a single small object, Alexander had pulled me right back to the day of the accident. He was telling me that the leash was still around my neck, and that he still held the other end. That night, the fear returned, but it was a different fear. It wasn't the paralyzing fear I felt 20 years ago. It was a fear mixed with anger, an anger that had lain dormant for too long under layers of expensive champagne and lonely trips. Why now? After so long, why did he need to remind me? Paranoia set in quickly. Every car that stopped on my street seemed suspicious. Every new face at my building's front desk was a potential spy. I felt like I did in the first days after the divorce, looking over my shoulder, but now it was worse. Before, he wanted me to be silent. Now, the message seemed different. It felt like a warning, a preparation for something. And it was this feeling of being hunted that made me make a decision. I had spent 20 years running. Enough. I had a resource I didn't have back then. Money. An almost limitless amount of money. The very money he gave me to buy my silence, I would now use to buy my safety. And my revenge. I couldn't go to the police, but I could bring the police to me, in a different way. I spent a week researching. Using all the digital security money could buy, I found an agency. Not a B-movie private detective agency that follows cheating husbands. A private intelligence agency, based in Geneva, made up of ex-Secret Service agents from various countries. They were discreet, expensive, and they said the best in the world at unearthing secrets that people like my ex-husband fought to keep buried. The meeting was in an anonymous hotel room. The man who met me was a middle-aged Frenchman, with a tired air and eyes that looked like they had already seen the worst of humanity. I didn't tell him the whole story. I didn't hire him to prove a murder. I hired him under the pretense of risk analysis. I told him that, as part of a complicated old divorce settlement, I needed a complete dossier on my ex-husband's current business dealings and vulnerabilities to protect myself from a possible hostile renegotiation of our agreement. It was a plausible-sounding corporate lie. I gave him a name, Alexander Montero, and I gave him a check with so many zeros he didn't even blink. "We will be very discreet, madame," was the only thing he said. The following weeks were torturous anxiety. I waited, and while I waited, my life of solitary luxury continued, but now with a purpose. Every glass of wine, every walk in the park, was an act of defiance. I was using the life he gave me to build the weapon that would destroy him. 3 weeks later, the French investigator contacted me. We met at the same hotel. He placed a tablet on the table. "We have some preliminary information for you, madame," he said, with his professional calm. The first piece of information made me hold my breath. They had found the fisherman, the man who rescued Alexander from the sea, a simple man who lived in a small fishing village, or rather, who used to live there. A month after the accident, the fisherman bought a new boat, a new house in the city, and moved his family. He told his neighbors he'd won the lottery. The investigator showed me the bank records. 3 days after the rescue, the fisherman's account received a transfer of $500,000 from a shell company in the Cayman Islands, a company that, after passing through 3 other layers of shell companies, belonged to Alexander. The fisherman wasn't a lucky hero. He was a paid witness to tell a story. The second piece of information was about why he had contacted me now. "Your ex-husband is about to close the biggest deal of his life," the investigator said. "The merger of his company with an Asian media conglomerate. It's a deal that will place him in the pantheon of the most powerful men in the world. But to do so, the conglomerate has initiated a due diligence process, a complete audit of his life and business. He's nervous. Any scandal, any loose end from the past, could ruin the deal. You, madame, are the biggest loose end of all. The package you received wasn't just a warning. It was him checking if the loose end was still tied up tight. So that was it. Fear. He was afraid I would talk, that I would jeopardize his grand prize. His arrogance was being threatened for the first time. There is one more thing," the investigator said, his tone changing, becoming more serious. "Something you may not know. We investigated the fight he had with his partner, Mr. David, in depth. It wasn't just about selling the company." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "We discovered that in the weeks before his death, David had secretly hired a digital security expert to audit the source code of the company's main software, the software that was the basis for everything." "An audit? Why?" I asked. The investigator looked me in the eyes. "Because David had a terrible suspicion. He thought Alexander wasn't the genius he claimed to be. He suspected that the code, the foundation of your empire, hadn't been created by them in the garage, as the legend goes. He thought Alexander had stolen it." I felt the floor disappear from under me. The company's founding story, the legend Alexander told in every interview. All of it. A lie? And was he right? I asked, my voice a thread. "Yes," the investigator confirmed. "The code was stolen from a college classmate of theirs. A brilliant programmer, but with no business acumen, who died of an overdose a few years before your company took off. David had found proof, old emails, drafts of the code. He was going to expose Alexander. The entire company was a fraud. The murder wasn't just for greed. It was to cover up the original sin." I sat there, absorbing the enormity of that revelation. The entire life I had lived with him was a lie built on top of another lie. The investigator began to pack his things. "Madame, I must give you a warning," he said, his professional tone now mixed with genuine concern. "My job is to be invisible, but your ex-husband has almost limitless resources. My sources tell me he knows he's being investigated, and he knows it was you who hired us." I stared at him, terror returning with full force. "He's no longer just watching you. He's moving against you. You are no longer a loose end from the past. To him now, you are an active and present threat. Be very, very careful." He stood up and left, leaving me alone in that hotel room with the truth, a truth far bigger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I hadn't just unearthed a murder. I had unearthed the fraud that propped up a multi-billion-dollar empire, and the builder of that empire knew, and he was coming for me. The investigator's warning rang in my head like an air raid siren. He knows. He's moving against you. The fear returned, but this time, it was different. It was no longer the fear of a ghost from the past. It was the fear of a real, present, and mortal threat. I knew Alexander wouldn't be sending another reminder. The next package wouldn't contain a fishing lure. It would contain my end. I spent the next 48 hours locked in my penthouse, my heart in my throat, going over my options. Run? He would find me. No matter which corner of the world I ran to, his money and influence would find me. Go to the police? I still had no concrete proof, just a web of circumstantial evidence that his lawyers would make look like the fantasy of a crazy ex-wife. I only had one option left. I could no longer play defense. I had to attack. I had to force a final confrontation, but on my own terms, on my own territory. I used the same investigator to send a message to Alexander. The message was simple. We need to talk about David and about the source code. Meet me in Geneva, at the bank vault, where I keep my most precious assets. Come alone. It was a gamble. I was using his greed and arrogance as bait. The mention of the source code would make him come, to find out what I had, and the idea of meeting me in a bank vault, surrounded by his own wealth, would make him feel safe, in control. The meeting was set. The stage for my final act was ready. The bank vault was a private, windowless room with brushed steel walls. A cold, silent place, perfect for secrets and confessions. He arrived, 20 years older, but with the same aura of power and danger. He entered the room, and the bank guards closed the solid steel door behind us. We were alone. "Laura," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've aged well. The money suits you." "Your money, you mean?" I replied, my voice firm. "Our money," he corrected. "The money from the company we built. The one you built on David's body and on someone else's stolen code," I shot back. He laughed. A genuine, amused laugh. "You really have been digging. I admire your determination. But so what? You can't prove anything. You never could. I'm here as a courtesy, and to give you one last piece of advice. Forget it. Go back to your life of luxury and silence. It's what's best for you." "The time for advice is over, Alexander," I said. And then, I played my card. My grand plan. "I know I can't bring you to justice, but I can destroy your legacy, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." "And how do you plan to do that?" he asked, his tone still amused. "I'm dying, Alexander," I lied, with all the conviction I could muster. "Terminal cancer. The doctors have given me months. I have nothing to lose, and I've spent the last few months writing my memoirs, a book, with all the details, the fishing lure, the insurance policy, the stolen code. Your silent confession the day you offered me the divorce. I recorded all our important conversations back then. I was young, but I wasn't stupid. I have everything." He stopped smiling. "No publisher would touch it. My lawyers would destroy them." "You're right," I agreed. "That's why the book won't be published. It will be released on the internet, for free, from anonymous servers, with copies spread all over the world, programmed to be released through a dead man's switch system. If my heart stops beating tomorrow, for any reason, natural or not, the whole world will know your story. Your big deal with the Asian conglomerate will go down the drain. Your reputation will turn to dust. You won't be a genius. You'll be a murderer and a fraud." I stared at him, waiting to see panic, anger. I had him cornered. Checkmate. But he just looked at me. And then, he smiled again. But this time, it was a different smile. A smile of genuine admiration. "Wow," he said, almost in a whisper. That was brilliant. Truly. The lie about the terminal illness to create a sense of urgency and make me believe you have nothing to lose. The idea of the book, the dead man's switch. It's a perfect plan." I was confused by his reaction. "Clever, Laura," he continued. "You really learned to play the game all these years. You learned to be like me." He paused, and the smile vanished, giving way to an expression of pity. "But you forgot the most important rule of the game, the rule David never understood." "And what's that?" I asked. "I always win," he said. He took his phone out of his pocket. He dialed a single number. When the person on the other end answered, he didn't say hello. He said just one word, a cold, final word. Contingency. He hung up the phone and put it back in his pocket. "What did you do?" I asked, a new kind of fear starting to form. "You see, Laura," he explained, with the calmness of a professor explaining an equation. "When you reach a certain level of power, you're no longer a person. You're an institution. And the first rule of any institution is self-preservation. The merger with the Asian conglomerate isn't a deal. It's the union of two institutions. And this new entity has protocols. Protocols for existential threats." He looked at me. "You, with your story, have become an existential threat. Your plan was perfect for destroying me, the man. But the institution cannot be destroyed. It just protects itself." "What is contingency?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's the protocol for when one of its leaders, in this case me, is irreversibly compromised, when there's a threat that can't be bought, intimidated, or eliminated silently. The protocol is simple. Erase the threat and the compromised leader, together, at once, to protect the larger organism. My partners can't risk this story leaking. And now that you've cornered me, The risk is too great. I stared at him, the horror of his words hitting me like a wave. They're going to kill us? Don't be so dramatic, he said with a final drop of irony. They're going to neutralize us. An accident. Maybe a gas leak in this vault's ventilation system. A failure in the door locks. It will be quick and tragic. The bitter ex-wife who lures her husband into a trap and ends up killing them both. The press will love it. I looked at the solid steel door, at the windowless walls. I had locked myself in with the monster, and in doing so, I had given him the key to our mutual destruction. I spent 20 years afraid of him. Then I spent my life running from his memory. That night I thought I had finally beaten him, that I had found justice for David. But the monster I helped create, with my silence and his money, was too big. It could no longer be killed. By trying to expose the truth, I didn't light a candle. I just locked the vault door from the inside, with both of us trapped in the darkness forever. The word contingency echoed off the steel walls of the vault. Alexander faced me, no longer with arrogance, but with a grim weariness, like a king who has just ordered his own castle to be burned down to kill a single intruder. I waited for the gas, for the click of a gun, for the darkness, but nothing happened. Instead, a large screen, which previously looked like a dark mirror on the wall, lit up with a soft hum. Text appeared on it, a contract, and Alexander's voice, now coming from speakers in the room, began to explain, devoid of any emotion. The contingency isn't death, Laura. Death would be too easy, and I've never liked the easy way out, his voice said, while he himself watched me from across the room. This is a negotiation. He pointed to the massive steel door. This isn't a simple vault. It's a survival bunker. We have food, water, and filtered air for 2 months. Comfortable, isn't it? But there's only one way out. The door requires 2 things to open. Our fingerprints, yours and mine, read simultaneously on a biometric panel. I looked at the panel next to the door. There were 2 readers, side by side. And the second condition, he continued, is the most important. The door will only unlock after you, Laura. Record a video statement. A statement for the camera right above that screen. I followed his gaze. A small black lens was staring at me. In this statement, he detailed, you will retract everything. You will say that your accusations were the result of a mental breakdown caused by grief and a terminal cancer diagnosis. You will say that David was like a brother to me, and that his death was the most tragic accident of my life. And you will say that your proof was fabricated in an act of desperation. You will discredit yourself, convincingly and definitively. I stared at him, shocked by the cruelty of the plan. You think I would do that? I don't think. I know, he said, because the alternative is for both of us to die in here, of old age, of boredom. The choice is yours, a small, recorded humiliation in exchange for your life and your fortune, or a slow, forgotten death in this luxury tomb. The trap was perfect. He didn't need to kill me. He was going to force me to choose between my life and final justice for David. He was going to make me his accomplice again, but this time, publicly. The first few days were a game of silence. We ignored each other in the confined space. I refused to speak to him, and he, in turn, seemed to be enjoying the situation, reading the philosophy books that were part of the bunker's survival kit. But the silence didn't last. He needed to break me, and he started talking. You know, David was a good man, he began one night as I was trying to sleep on one of the couches. But he was a dreamer, and dreamers don't build empires. They are the fuel. We burn the dreamers to keep the engine running, he confessed, not with guilt, with pride. He told me details from that day on the boat. He told me how he turned off the radio, how he waited for the storm to form on the horizon, how he released the boom at the exact moment so the mast would hit David on the head hard enough to daze him, but not leave an obvious mark. He told me how he watched him fall into the water, confused, and how he simply moved the boat away, waiting just long enough before starting the engine and beginning his performance as a desperate survivor. He told me these things with the same casualness he would use to describe a business deal, and with every detail, a part of me died. And another part, a part I didn't know I had, grew stronger, colder. You judge me, Laura, he said another day, but you loved what my engine provided for you. You loved the apartments, the dresses, the trips. You signed the contract. You were my silent accomplice for 20 years. The only difference between us is that I have the courage to admit what I am, and you You still try to pretend you're a hero. He was dismantling me, piece by piece, using the truth as a weapon of torture. The days dragged on. A week. 2. The luxury of the bunker began to feel stale. The filtered air, heavy. The gourmet food, tasteless. We were both deteriorating, physically and mentally. He, with his arrogance and cruelty, and me, with my hatred and my resolve. I knew he was right about one thing. There was no way out. Even if I recorded that video, even if he let me leave, he would never leave me in peace. I would always be the loose end. My freedom would just be a larger cell. It was in the 3rd week that I noticed the change in him. He started coughing. A dry, persistent cough. He started running a fever. The invincible man, the titan of technology, was being brought down by a common virus. A cold, perhaps, potentiated by the enclosed environment. He, who controlled everything, couldn't control his own lungs. He grew weak. He spent most of his time lying down, sleeping. And it was on one of those afternoons, while he was sleeping a fitful, feverish sleep, that I saw my chance. My real choice. I approached him. His face was pale. His breathing was weak. I could use his hand on the biometric reader. He wouldn't wake up. I would still need to record the video, but I could get out. I could leave him there, to die alone. It would be my revenge. I went to the door panel. I looked at the camera waiting for my false confession, and I looked at my reflection in the brushed steel of the wall, the face of a tired, but not defeated woman, and then I understood. Leaving this vault wasn't victory. Victory was ensuring he never left. Victory was ensuring the world knew the truth, no matter the cost. My original plan, the dead man's switch, was still active. My investigators, my digital security team, were waiting outside. They didn't need me to die. They just needed my final order. Alexander thought he had given me a choice between my life and my honor, but he was wrong. He, in his arrogance, had given me a much more powerful choice. The choice between my freedom and the certainty of his justice. With a calm I hadn't felt in 20 years, I went to the bunker's small emergency communication panel. There was a function to send encrypted text messages to a single pre-programmed number. My security teams. I typed a single sentence. The confession protocol. Activate now. I sent it. There was no explosion, no alarm, just silence. But I knew that, outside, Alexander's world was crumbling. The servers were releasing the files. The newsrooms of the world's biggest papers were receiving the dossier. The truth was free. I sat on the couch, across the room, and watched my ex-husband sleep. The monster. He could wake up. He could try to kill me with his bare hands. Or maybe we would both die there, of old age, in that luxury tomb. It didn't matter. I spent 20 years afraid of him. Then I spent my life running from his memory. That night, I thought I'd finally beaten him, only to find I had just imprisoned myself with him. But the monster I helped create with my silence was too big to be simply defeated. He needed to be contained. By trying to expose the truth, I didn't light a candle at the end of the tunnel. I just locked the vault door from the inside, with both of us trapped in the darkness forever. And for the first time in a long time, I felt finally at peace.